All right, welcome. This is Authentic Leadership Academy. Welcome to the live business session for this week. Wow, so hope your week has been great. Mine certainly has been, and I look forward to the remaining days of the week. All right, so here we are today. It's another live business session. And if you recall, we have been talking about the divine blueprint on leadership. The divine blueprint on leadership. It's been treated as a 4-part series. I mean, we could go on and on and on. There's so many aspects of leadership to examine, under this umbrella. Because essentially, when we talk about divine blueprint, we're talking about what is the Bible saying about leadership. In essence, what is God saying about leadership? What can we learn from the Bible on leadership? And I love a statement, a quote that I read from John Maxwell, one of the grandfathers on this subject recently, where he said, if you want to learn leadership, then you need to look at the greatest book, that has ever existed. That's the greatest book on leadership. And he was talking about no other book than the Bible. That is what we believe to contain God's word. And it deals with life. Generally, it deals with life, and a very important aspect of life is leadership. A very important aspect of life is leadership. In fact, if you are talking about life and talking about wanting to make anything out of life, if you leave out the subject of leadership, then you have missed it entirely. You have missed it entirely, because leadership is at the core of life. Is at the core of life. That's why in part 3, remember what our topic was. It was about leadership and life transformation. Leadership and life transformation. That's why I always call attention to a very important aspect of the mandate of Jesus, which we all too often overlook or don't pay enough attention to, and that is the leadership aspect of it. The leadership aspect of that mandate gave that mandate the longevity and therefore the potency, that the accomplishment of the first part required to last for till today. What do I mean? Why did Jesus put a team together? What was his relationship with the team? What did he make out of the team of 12? That signaled the cornerstone nature of leadership in his assignment. All right. He didn't have to put a team of 12 together, perhaps, to get his job done. But that was the first thing he did. It was the very first thing that he did, to assemble 12 guys, to make them a promise. I'm going to make you into fishers of men, into leaders, if you like. I'm going to make you into who I am, or make you into personalities after my order, so that when I'm done with the first part of my job, you can perpetuate, magnify the impact of that first part for others to benefit. So you and I would not have benefited from what he did if there were no 12. All right. The 12 was a force that was required to broadcast and perpetuate the significance of what he did on the cross. Okay, so you understand the leadership from that point of view as well, that your influence and whatever you do where you are today is not intended to benefit just people today. It's intended to have a lasting impact. That's why we read from John 15 and verse 16. Let's check that scripture out. From John 15 and verse 16. Jesus emphasized a very important point, and we shouldn't miss out on that point. Okay, I'm going to come back to Matthew 23. That's where we're going to start today. But now that we're talking about the significance of leadership, let's look at John 15 and verse 16. Recall that in part 1, we made reference to this scripture. Actually, we read from this scripture, and look at what it says. It says, let me read the New Living Translation version. Okay, John 15:16. He says, you didn't choose me. All right, you didn't choose me. I chose you and appointed you to go and produce lasting fruit. All right, you didn't choose me, I chose you. I gave you the leadership responsibility, just like Jesus did. He was speaking to his people, and we ought to learn from that. He said, you did not choose me, I chose you. I appointed you to go and produce lasting fruit. All right? So that the Father will give you whatever you ask for using my name. That's the reward part of your leadership assignment. Okay, when you get your job done, it ushers you into certain privileges. That's what he's saying there. But let's stay with the to produce lasting fruit element. Okay, lasting fruit, meaning that the impact of your leadership input has to outlast you. All right, and the impact needs to go to be sustained well into the future. How can you sustain the impact of your tenure as a leader? It is by producing people who will go on to produce other people, who will go on to produce other people. So what Jesus was saying here is that your focus must be clear. It's not just to produce fruit. It is to produce lasting fruit. There is the aspect of sustainability. There is the aspect of perpetuity or longevity. That's why I spoke about, the longevity of, Jesus died on the cross more than 2,000 years ago. If he did not put together a team of 12 and prepare them accordingly to be able to do essentially what he was doing, he couldn't have sustained the impact of his input, of that work, of that great accomplishment till today. The reason that we're still hearing about him, about the work he did, about his death on the cross, about the journey, that he made, the reason that lives are preserved today, the reason that people have hope today is because of what he did through the people whom he developed. That's the way that leadership works. Okay, that's the way that leadership works. So, how can we ignore that kind of effect, that kind of example? That's why that book is such a great book. Today is part 4, and I'm going to stop here. For the Divine Blueprint on Leadership, part 4, And, our focus today is what I call authentic character development. Authentic character development. That is according to the Bible. Authentic character development. Remember, this is the authentic leadership community. And by the way, if you're watching, if you're participating, and you are not yet a member, all right, you better check the description and you would find the link there. All right, join and be a member. Become a member of the Authentic Leadership Academy. Our discussion today will open your eyes to two things. One, why you need authenticity in your conduct of leadership. And number two, what membership of the Authentic Leadership Academy will do to you, how it will help you, what impact it will have on you. And hopefully you would be able to judge whether it stands to offer you value and the nature of the value that you'll be offered being a part of that. So today we want to advance our discussion further to look at the divine blueprint on leadership, part 4. But part 4, we're focusing on authentic character development, authentic character development. Now, I'm going to start from what Jesus's reaction was to the leaders of his day and time. There were leaders in his day. And they had a particular characteristic. And when we look at the way he interacted with them, we would learn a lot about, again, an important aspect of the divine blueprint on leadership. There were the scribes, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees. All right. I remember, Archbishop Bezini Daosa, who came up, who coined that Sadducees to the sad you see. Sad you see that they are not very excited people. But these were the leaders of his time. If you like, these were religious leaders, yes, but they were leaders within the context, of the organization. But indeed, they went beyond religious leaders because they had such knowledge of the law, which was, the scriptures at the time, and they were very highly regarded. Okay, not because they had much to offer the people, not because they made any valuable contributions, but because of the way they conducted their leadership responsibility. All right, and you will see the kind of people they were because Jesus himself described them. And it is that description that we need to learn from, and his attitude towards that carries such important, exposition about how to do leadership and how not to do leadership. So you can pick benefits from the way he interacted with them, from the things that he said to them, from the descriptions that he gave about them. And so I want to read a couple of scriptures, okay, that talks about these people, and so that we have an understanding of who they are. And note what was Jesus's main problem with the leadership at that time, and what was he seeking to correct, okay, in the leadership at that time. So if you join me, on your screen, you have reading from Matthew 23 and verse 1. And we will run through this, quite quickly, but I want us to do some reading. And you should learn to do this, by the way, as often as you can. So he said, Then spake Jesus to the multitude and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Okay? All therefore, whatsoever they bid you observe and do, not after their works, for they say and do not. Let me read the middle portion, which is the New King James Version. He said, from verse 3, therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do, but do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. Let's stay there for a moment. So we're told clearly here, he's speaking about these leaders. He's speaking about these prominent leaders, these feared leaders, not quite respected. They were feared because they made use of their authority. They used their authority to intimidate and to oppress. We haven't gotten there yet, but that's like a preview for you, and we will get there. We will get there. All right. And so he said, whatever these leaders tell you to observe, you observe them and do. If they tell you this is the way things are, this is what the law says. If they enunciate a principle to you, observe the principle, learn the principle. That's what he was saying. He said, learn the principle and do it. He said, and do it. Don't just learn and do. What was he saying? The principles they teach are correct. These were men who knew, who had knowledge. Their problem was they held on to what the letter, you say the letter, not the spirit of the knowledge. All right? They knew what was written and they interpreted it verbatim, not knowing that there was more to the principle, to what was written, than what they were saying. So, in a sense, they were full of error, because Jesus also pointed that out later when he said to them, to their face, he said, you guys are full of error. And the reason you are full of error is because you don't know the scriptures and you can't experience, or you don't experience the power that is contained. Now, you can't understand the scriptures based on verbatim interpretation. And if you stay at the level of the letter, you can't access the power that the same scripture has to offer. If you take a principle on the face of it and you implement on the basis of superficial understanding, verbatim understanding, you can't experience the power that is contained in the principle. The principle will not work in your hands. Why? Because you don't have the understanding, the requisite understanding. You can quote it, all right? And you can try to even do it. But because understanding is lacking, you are unable to do it exactly how it should be done, such that it produces result. Okay? So this was the issue. He was telling them, observe what they tell you to observe. Pay attention to doing it. He said, but don't look at what they do. He said, don't do according to what they do. Why? Because they say and don't do. The problem of these leaders. So what are we getting from here? Number one is that leadership has rules. There is a way to do leadership right. So you need to learn the rules. Number two is that even bad leaders know the rules. They know the rules. So they can teach you the rules. They can make you observe the rules. And you should learn from them. And that's why I often say you can learn from bad leaders. If you can learn from failure, and bad leaders are failures in their own right, why can't you learn from bad leaders? So before we get, somewhat and think, how can I learn from a bad leader? Well, there you have it. You can learn from bad leaders. That's number two. So you can learn from bad leaders. Number three is that be careful what you learn. Learn the principle from them. Don't learn their own actions. Why? Because their actions are inconsistent with the principles that they teach. So they teach it, but they don't do it. They do something differently. You are expected to depart from that by doing what you learned. By doing what you learned. All right. So 3 very important lessons there for us. And 3 revelations of the character of these leaders, which, by the way, is the character of many leaders today. Many of those leaders that you complain about, that you fear, that rely heavily on the use of their power or authority, more precisely. They know the rules. If you like, they know the theory. Now, they don't have a conviction about it. And they don't do it. So what they do is at variance with what they teach. The nature of the leaders of his time. And he was warning the people that that's not how to do leadership. As much as you can learn from them and should learn from them, that's an aspect of how they conduct their leadership business that you must not learn. Now, you correct that error by what? By doing what you learn. So let your action be aligned. Let it be influenced first by what you have learned, and let it be in alignment with what you have learned. That begins to tell us what? That begins to bring us into the realm of authenticity. Authenticity. So what Jesus was saying here is that those bad leaders, those leaders who have a larger than life attitude, all right, or profile or stature, that they are not authentic because they teach something and they do something else. We would often say they don't walk their talk. All right. And I think you need to look at my series, Becoming Authentic, where I make a clear distinction between walking the talk and walking your talk. What Jesus was saying here is that these leaders don't walk their talk. All right. But there is a higher level of authenticity, which is more all encompassing. And that has to do with walking the talk. What are we saying? Walking the talk, all right, builds on the point I made here, that leadership has rules, is governed by rules. These men know the rules. Okay, there is a way that you are expected to conduct yourself as a leader if you must do it right, or if we must consider that you're a true leader. Living up to those rules is walking the talk. Why? Because those rules are peculiar to leadership. They are being examined in the context of leadership. When Jesus was saying here that the leaders, that whatever they tell you to observe, he was talking about what to learn from that. He was being specific. The context was specific. So when it comes to leadership, there are specific rules. I mean, it's like, any other profession. There are specific rules of conduct. There is a way that things work. All right. There are certain explanations given for certain phenomena. And in order to live true to that professional calling, in order to live true to your leadership responsibility, in this case, you need to observe the rules, not your rules, but the rules. All right. So I speak a lot more about that in the Becoming Authentic series. It's a 9, episode series. It will help you a great deal. It treats the issue of authenticity, all right, within a more robust framework. And it talks about why, some of us, as much as we try to be authentic, we're still disappointed because our people their verdict about us still does not give us a pass mark on that score. And it can be really, distressing if you find that can be distressful or distressing if you find that, in spite of all that you do, you're not coming across as being authentic, to your people. All right. And I know that, a true leader needs to be authentic. Is a significant leverage for effective achieving leadership success, or for achieving leadership effectiveness. All right, so that we begin to see that now we are coming into the realm of authenticity. Now let's go ahead and look at a few more things. So he said from verse 4, he said, now look at how he begins to describe what these people do. All right, what these people do. Because recall that he said, they say, but they don't do. So don't observe their works. Don't do according to what they do. Don't follow their example. All right, don't follow their example. Don't follow their example. Their example will mislead you. Now, again, let me speak to this. All of you who have heard repeatedly that you shouldn't listen to the words of people, you should look at their example. And there are two problems with that. The first is that it is possible that the example, the works in this case, what the actions that the people are taking, which you are looking at, it is possible that, there is no basis for it. So it may look okay to you. It may look attractive to you. It may look as if they are right in your eyes. But what is the basis for it? You don't know, because you are not paying attention to their words. That's what the advocates of, example, that's what they say. But the word is important. What Jesus was saying here is that he said, observe what they say and do them. So you act in accordance to what you heard. So you must hear something from them. People who want to teach you must say something. So examples are relevant. The works are relevant only to the extent of the basis, which is the word that is expressed. Only to that extent. The second thing, of course, is this. They can say and do, but what they do is inconsistent with what they are saying. So again, when you look at the example, you have to measure it in relation to something for it to be of value. For it to be of value. Okay, so verse 4 says, they bind heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on men's shoulders, on people's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. You see this man, you see the leaders. Do you have leaders like that? Are you one of such leaders who make heavy demands, who pile up great expectations on your people, on your team? You want things that are hard for them to do. You want them to do many things at the same time. You set unreasonable and unrealistic deadlines. You give them things to do that they don't have the capacity for. And you expect too much of your people. Burdened by your leadership. They're following you. They're looking up to you. But what they get from you are heavy burdens. And when they look at you, you don't carry any of those burdens. All the things that you're asking them to do, you don't do them. They don't see the work you do. They don't see the initiatives you take. They don't see sacrifices that you make. All that they see is you asking them to do this, to do that, to go here, to go there, and expressing disappointment in them when they don't measure up. You are acting like these people. You will not move. They don't move such bodies. They don't do anything. They won't touch anything with one of their fingers. They are good at making excuses. They sit there as if they are controllers, just issuing orders and instructions, and they expect to be obeyed. And they are even oblivious that the things they're asking people to do are very difficult. And they never offer help. So when the people come and to ask them for some guidance, they say, look, go and look for how to do it. What I want to see is the result. Have you had things like that before? But you are not willing to help the people. You are expecting them to produce results. What kind of leader are you? This is what these fellows do. Look at verse 5. Another aspect of how they conduct themselves. He said, but all their works they do to be seen by men. To be seen by men. They like to show off. The way they dress, they make their phylacteries broad and they like the borders of their garments. Show off. They like to show off as the leaders. They love the best places, verse 6, at feasts, the best seats in the synagogues. Verse 7, greetings in the marketplaces, and to be called by men, rabbi, rabbi, that is teacher, teacher, leader, to be saluted. That's what they love. Show off, visibility, acknowledgement, respect, the subservience of their people. That's what they love. They like to be acknowledged. I mean, if they come to you and you don't give them that recognition, it will be a big deal. Many of them like that today. And I hope you are not one of such. I hope for your sake that you are not one of such. Because that's not the way to do leadership. Remember, we're still talking about these people. All of these things we have been told, don't do their works. So these things we're talking about, talk about the things they do, and it describes who they are. And we have today, without the labels, those who are like them. They are scribes, they are Pharisees, they are Sadducees, practically in substance. You don't label them as such, we label them as leaders today. But this is what they do. He said, but you, in verse 8, now he was telling them, this is, he had said, don't do their works. So here he's telling them, in furtherance to that statement he made earlier, to the counsel he gave them earlier, he said, but you, in verse 8, but you do not be called teacher, for one is your teacher, the Christ, and you are all brethren. He said, don't go that route. Don't look forward to being called teacher. He said, do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your father, he who is in heaven. And do not be called teachers. Don't be called leaders, for one is your teacher, one is your leader, the Christ. I'd like to say that in those verses where he said, don't be called this, don't be called that, for one, what is really saying is that every one of us today, we are sent. That's why he said in that John 15:16, he said, you didn't choose me, I chose you, and I appointed you to go and bear fruit. I sent you. Every leader today is sent, or at least ought to be sent. So no one should come and, carry himself as though there is none like him. There is none like God, because it's all started there. That's why Jesus always made reference to God, his Father, the one from whom he came, through whom he came, the one that he represents. That's why he often said, I can of my own self do nothing. It's not that he didn't have capability. Of course, he surely had. He was acknowledging that whatever it is I have, I received from him. I am sent. I'm a representative. Yes, I am matured. Yes, I can lead. But please don't salute me as the leader. What I have didn't come from me. It didn't originate from me. I learned it from somebody else. And so those who believe that they can be leaders without learning from people, they are just joking. And they are falling into error, the error of pride. Because everyone for you to be anything, you must learn from others. And especially leadership. Especially leadership. Jesus himself acknowledged that he was sent. So it's not that you are not trained. It's not that you can't be a good leader. But we don't have to salute you, pay obeisance to you, bow down to you, as it were. And you don't have to demand all of that. Because the fact that we even give you that doesn't make you a leader. It is the impact that you have on your people that makes you a leader. All right, so you see in verse 11, he was saying, he went ahead and said, he said, but he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. That's what you should focus on. It's not on the titles. It's not on how well regarded you are. It's not on you trying to assume, a figure that's larger than life, that's of no relevance. It is about service and servanthood. He said, because whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. That's the attitude of true leaders. We're still talking about the divine blueprint for leadership, and we're examining today authentic character development. Okay? Now look at what he begins to say to them. And this is where I wanted to bring out, from verse 13. He said, but woe to you. Now he began to speak to those false leaders, those bad leaders of his time. He began to further expose their activities. And one thing I found here, and this goes all the way many verses down, please look at it. He said, but woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. That's it. Hypocrites. When you look at verse 14, it says, woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. Every time he gives them that description before saying the reason why he called them hypocrites. So if you look at verse 13, it said, but woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. For you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for you neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. You are going nowhere. You have no purpose. You have no noble promise. And yet you are preventing those who are looking for such promise, who want to make meaning out of their lives. You are preventing them from doing so. You are standing as an obstacle to the development of people who are looking up to you. Hypocrites. Hypocrites. You want to be called leaders. You want to be celebrated, but you will never allow others to grow, who don't even want to be called leaders, who don't want to be celebrated, who just want to value added to their lives, and who want to develop to a point where they can also add value to the lives of people and to the community. You are standing as an obstacle. You hypocrites. That's what you do. So Jesus is pointing to one of the number one problem of leaders, of bad leaders, of false leaders. And perhaps the greatest challenge for anyone for any leader to overcome: hypocrisy. Of course, the flip side of that is authenticity. What he's saying is that you must be authentic as a leader. Otherwise, you are a false leader, you have little use. People should pay attention to what you have to say, but they must never do what you do. That's not a great compliment. That's not something that anybody can be happy about or should celebrate. That's an indication of a warped personality, of one who doesn't have any value to add. Why is it that you don't have value to add? Because that conduct is foolishness. For you to know something and to do differently is foolishness. Because for you to know something and to do according to what you know is wisdom. He said, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, not something else. This is, you acquire the knowledge, you receive the instruction, and you do according to the instruction. It reminds me of Joshua 1 and verse 8. He said, this book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you will meditate on it night and day, that you may observe to do what? All that is written in the book. That is, do according to the knowledge you received. Be authentic in the application of the knowledge. That's wisdom. Not to do differently. Why? Because you can't get the intended result of the knowledge you have acquired by doing differently. That's what these guys were doing. They are preaching one thing, they are doing something else. So what kind of results will they get? They are fools. That's why Jesus called them, he said, they are blind men who are leading the blind. So in case you are following a Pharisee, it's time to decamp. It's time to decamp. Yes, it's true you can learn from them from what you have seen, but learning from them, you will immediately see that you can't stay continually under them. You can't say, okay, I will just learn what they say and I won't act. Why? Because you are soon going to be at loggerheads with them, because they will notice that you don't do what they do, which is what they want you to do. They don't want you, all right? And if you continue long enough under them, you would end up becoming like them, somebody who knows what to do and never does it, does something contrary. And by the way, the reason they do that is all for their interest. It's all about their interests, all about their interests. You have seen them, you see the way they carry themselves. They are people of self-interest. They are not about who it is that is following them. They are led by self-interest. They are motivated by self-interest. And they are very deceitful. All right, so you can look at it. You look at verse 14 again. It says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. Therefore, you will receive greater condemnation. Wow, there's a lot in there. They go misleading people, taking advantage of the disadvantaged devour widows' houses. Those are people who need help, but they will be going to take away from them under the guise of helping them. They go there pretending, making long prayers. When they pray, a lot, or they speak a lot. Earlier today, I think I was reading a scripture, and it was in the book of Ecclesiastes, if I remember very well, and it basically was saying that, it's only a fool that says too much. When somebody talks too much, it is evidence of folly, of foolishness. So when they make long prayers, it's evidence, it's talking too much. That's what you do in prayer, talking too much, long prayers. And somewhere, as Jesus said, look, is not the length of prayers that makes your prayer heard. There is no relationship. Length has nothing to do with the potency of your prayer. But those who are foolish, like these leaders, they pretend they know. Because when you pretend, it means that you are doing something on purpose. You are doing something that is not true on purpose, in order to achieve an interest, a goal, an objective that is personal. That's what it is. Pretense to make long prayers. It said, therefore, you will receive greater condemnation. That is, there is no reward to bad leaders, for bad leaders. This kind of leadership runs contrary to what the Bible prescribes as how to lead right. And the reward or the result of it, however you look at it, will ultimately fetch condemnation. Certainly, God won't be excited. And ultimately, men will not be excited. Why? Because the hypocrite ultimately will be found out. Usually, much earlier than they imagined. Their goal is to deceive with the intention of achieving a personal benefit. But they are soon found out. In the case of these people, and that's how many of them survived, they were the custodians of the law in their days. So they could use that, they could hide under that to perpetrate a lot of, wrongdoing. If you look at verse 15, it said, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. It said, for you travel land and sea to win one proselyte, that is one convert. They go to any length to convince people to follow them, to believe in them, to commit themselves to them. But what happens? It said, when he is won, that is when those people yield to their leadership, what happens? You make them twice as much a son of hell as yourself. That is, they also produce successors. But the leaders they produce are not just bad leaders. They are not just false leaders. They are twice as bad. They are twice as bad as themselves. See, that's the risk of staying under such leadership, all right, for long. That's the risk of staying under such leadership for long, okay? That's the risk. That's the risk. That's the risk. Okay. All right. So look at that. There's so much to talk about here. So much to talk about. Okay. In verse 16, he said, "Woe to you, blind guides, who say, whoever swears by the temple, it is nothing. But whoever swears by the gold of the temple, he is obliged to perform it." Jesus said in verse 17, "Fools and blind, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that purifies the gold, or that makes the gold sacred, or makes the gold, acceptable?" So we have all these descriptions that shows us that the divine blueprint places character development as a priority. And we see description here of leaders who have no character, of leaders who know the principles of leadership, but fail to observe them. And because they fail to observe them, they are unable to develop and exhibit the right character. But Jesus said one thing to the people. He said, don't do what they do. Don't observe their works. Observe what they say and do what they say. Don't do what they do. Now, what he's saying is this. And if you remember the last part that says they go to a great length to win a convert. Winning a convert means that they succeed in deceiving certain people such that those people believe in them. They believe that these are the true leaders. And those ones submit to them. And because they submit to them, we are told, what will the result be? They reproduce themselves in those ones. And in doing so, they make those ones twice as bad as they. So, so bad leaders that succeed in getting certain people to commit to them reproduce even worse set of leaders. And they can go to great lengths to convince people, albeit through deceit, deceiving people. They are the ones that Jesus referred to as wolves. They are dressed as sheep. Wolves in sheep clothing. They present themselves as though they are credible shepherds. However, they are dangerous men, dangerous leaders. They will do anything. They will lure their people. They will, they go to any length, knowing that they can't do the right things. They have no interest in doing the right things, because doing the right things runs contrary to their personal interests. And unfortunately, those they produce, who are the people who they successfully deceive, become worse than themselves. And they go on to do worse things, including not even submitting to them or recognizing to them again, recognizing them again as leaders. You can see how these things work. But it talks about the development of character. So we understand that character develops from observing the rules and applying them. That's how you develop character. 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 And leadership is about character development. Authentic character development. Because if you learn the rules and live according to the rules, you begin to behave in the manner required of the principles that guide leadership. So your character develops into the one that is consistent with the practice of leadership. And so you will be authentic in your character. That's how it works. We will continue to talk about authenticity. We will continue to talk about character development. There is so much more to talk about character development, but let me leave it here. You can please go through that Matthew 23, all through it, and you see, and do something. I highlight the different descriptions of the character attributes that Jesus pointed out that made him call those fellows hypocrites. Because recall, he said, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. And then he says, he describes the way they behave. So all that description is about character. He was bringing out their character. And how did they get there? He showed it when he began to speak to them, when he began to give his people counsel. He said, these men know the law. These men know the rules. They know what it takes, what the demands. They know how to do leadership right. But observe that know-how, but act according to it, not according to them. Said if you act according to it, you won't produce these character attributes that they are noted for. You will avoid them. You would emerge a new kind of leader, the right kind of leader, authentic in your character, strong in your character. And then you'll be able to produce lasting fruit through others. The way you develop others will be different from the way that they are seeking to develop their own successors. Although they really don't have succession in mind, they really are not bothered. They are not even interested in living as leaders, but those are stories for another day. So I'm going to draw the curtains on the series, The Divine Blueprint on Leadership, with this fourth part. And I want to thank you for joining me. Please go ahead. If you're a member of the Academy, go ahead. When you listen, please comment, share your views. Let everybody else benefit. I encourage you also, if you have found value in this, this is what this community is about. Join. And if you have joined, become part of the affiliate, spread the word. Let's bring in more people. The more of us that have the understanding, that are able to develop true leadership competence, the better the society will be. We can't continue to complain about the leaders that we have if you and I will not take responsibility to learn and become leaders. Why was Jesus saying to these people, listen to this man, Observe whatever they tell you to observe, okay, but don't do. He was telling them how to become. These men were in the process of development into leaders. So it is crucial that we develop the capacity, the capability, the competence to provide the kind of leadership, good, authentic leadership that you and I are crying out for. Let us start from our level. Let's begin to work on ourselves. Let's begin to build the capacity. If you are not faithful in little, you can't be given much. If you are not faithful in another man's, no one will give you that which is your own. Those are principles. Those are truths. All right. Let's stop acting as hypocrites, looking for leaders elsewhere, looking for other people to be the leaders that can do well, that can do good, that can do the right things. Yet, we cannot put ourselves forward. We cannot swear that we can do the same thing. Some of you may even think, yes, if I were the one, I wouldn't do this, I wouldn't do this. Why are these people like this? I guarantee you that if you don't develop yourself, if you don't develop your leadership capability, if you ever get into those positions, you will perform worse. You will do worse things than those people you are today criticizing. The more reason why you need to look inward, work on yourself, take steps, and join groups like this, learn, so that you can be the leader that adds value. That is a saving grace indeed for the community. Not the authentic leadership community, but the larger community, the larger society, and indeed nations. Thank you once again. God bless you. Let's meet again next week. Is a weekly live business session, and we come and we discuss very important aspects of leadership, learning directly from the Word of God and nurturing great leaders based on truth. My name remains Olatunji Shobodu, the convener of the community and the founder and CEO, Emet Leadership Academy. God bless you. Enjoy the rest of your week.